Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Bruce Agnew, and I'm with the Hitler Transportation Accelerator Program. And this is our first session in 8 sessions during the course of the summit, focusing on all kinds of transportation and trade issues. I think our signature event will be our lunch program, where we have the CEO of the World Shipping Council, Joe Craven, joined by Northwest Seaports and Port of Vancouver, Fraser Harbor, in a I think a stimulating discussion about what's going on with global shipping and ports and their impact on ports. As we heard yesterday, the trade and tariff wars are affecting how goods are shipped around the country and shifting patterns between North America, Asia, and Europe, and a kind of never-ending mystery. So hopefully we'll get some clarification this afternoon. But I'm delighted to introduce our first panel. Senator Matt Benke is from Eastern Washington, and the Hoover app has his bio. Basically, we've worked with Matt for many years on supply chain issues, and in fact, he co-chairs the Washington State Supply Chain Coalition with Sherry Call from Washington Trucking, who will be speaking on our Cascadia quarter session later. And Representative Britt Rabel is from Idaho, and she is a PINWR Vice President incoming. And I think I read somewhere that you were the president of the Idaho Potato Council. Is that correct? National, the first woman executive of the National Potato Council. So pretty cool. They're going to introduce our panel, and I think we've got some slides. I will say a couple of other notes. We have a pretty big audience remote, so I hope everything is working there. And we have the Hoover tablet for your questions. And if you have any questions about how to get the questions, let me know. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the message that we hear today will be amplified beyond the folks in the room here. We will be preparing a report for members of Congress and the federal Canadian government, MLAs, legislators, state DOTs, local officials, the appropriate state legislative committees that are interested in these issues. We are put this program, these 8 sessions are a result of the work of the Build Northwest Council, which is basically the state legislative transportation leaders in all 5 Northwest states. We are funded to the U.S. Department of Transportation in our 2nd consecutive grant from the Build America Bureau. And I would just take a quick note that we are going to continue this supply chain, rail, and sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen discussion beyond this session in Portland, October 14th to 16th, and we'll be talking more about that in the summit. But we'll get deeper into these issues in Portland. So, Senator Benke, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bruce, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I see a lot of friendly faces, so don't ask the hard questions of me. Ask the Honorable Vice President here. Give her a hard time, but she's a great lady to work with. So good morning. On behalf of Representative Britt Rabel and myself, it's a pleasure to be a part of this supply chain effort. As you mentioned, not only being a co-chair in the supply chain caucus here in Washington State, the last 6-7 years, we started ours because of the issues that we had seen in that supply chain education, awareness, and understanding what it really means to identify what those critical issues are throughout that supply chain effort, even before COVID. Then, of course, COVID hit, and that maximizes the efforts that what we really need to have in the priority of funding effort in the coalition that we do in the Pacific Northwest, what it means to have our ports maximize that efforts, recruit the individuals that are out there, and of course the workforce that allows us to expand to companies in the private partnership. So we're gathered here today, it was like that, because my chat GPT said to say that, at a pivotal moment in our region's supply chains and logistic networks that we can see. It's a competitive that we see in a global environment, and that global competitiveness is evolving as the tariffs are going in and out, as they discuss, not only in our country, but in others. But how we really reshape our borders. And I believe there's an opportunities that we can reach across the aisle, that as we face these challenges of keeping up our supply chain, make them both cost-effective, competitive, and resilient as we see into the future. As supply chain vulnerabilities come into sharper focus, response must be bold and innovative. As we look at how we can marry and partner with technology, how we can leverage smart infrastructure and be data-driven solutions to not only safeguard, being a cybersecurity guy, the data that we use in there, but also the safety for the national security issues, not only current, but into the future. We're seeing a lot of new public-private partnerships, targeted investments in local and logistical hubs in the nation. And as we proceed into this discussion, what we can do here at Penmar is building that out from the edges, we call it there, and then into the inland seaport ideas that we established, not only in the Tri-City area, but into Idaho. And I think it's fitting that you see two of us sitting here as the gateway from the west into the centralized area. And as we continue the discussion, some of these will bring up the ideas, not only in the Vancouver, Washington State area, but moving into Idaho, and as we proceed into the mainland of the US and really a North American structure of today. But technology isn't enough. Collaboration, justification across these industries and communities is essential. We cannot do this without our constituents to agree that these are the movements that we can move ahead on. That means committing to continuing to foster strong relationships between not only our elected officials, private industries, and industry governments across the state and in North America. It's about breaking down silos, sharing the best business practices between US, Canada, and what we're seeing in this market, and really attracting the next generation of trade businesses, but also into the large urban area, and as we build out into those rural communities, like I mentioned today. And that means a lot to us to have 3 individuals that will be leading that effort, and I will turn it over to Representative Brent to introduce herself, as well as transition to our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As my kind moderator has noted, I am Britt Raybould. I am a state legislator from Idaho and also a vice president with Penmar. When they asked me to moderate this panel, my first response was, why on earth are you asking me? I live in Idaho. And it's not that supply chains aren't important for those of us who live in that state. It just is a different context when we aren't necessarily talking about ports, even though we do have the Port of Lewiston north. The challenges for us, and from this, I'm drawing my personal perspective. I farm with my father and brother in eastern Idaho, and our ability to have an effective supply chain is not only going to determine whether or not we can move a crop to market, but whether or not we even have a crop. During the course of the last few years, as everyone in this room is well acquainted with, there were difficulties in getting access to things in a timely fashion. And not just because the toilet paper wasn't on the shelves, as important as that might be, but we were having difficulty getting equipment to ensure that our central pivot irrigation systems could operate. And if I can't operate my pivot and irrigate my crops, I don't have a crop. And so if I'm looking at this supply chain issue, I am looking at it from the perspective of someone who gets pinched on both sides, not just from the standpoint of being on the recipient or shipping out, but both needing to be receiving goods and services on the one side and also in turn being able to send out what I'm producing. There's less slack in the system. That's the reality of where we've ended up with just in time demand, just in time supply management. And so the reality that we're looking at today is, does technology provide an avenue to help take away some of these pinch points that have developed over time? I don't think it was intended for it to become difficult for those of us. I think it was looked at as this is a cost-saving measure. This is the way to be most efficient and effective when it comes to business. But at the end of the day, we are faced with a series of challenges, whether we're policymakers or we're working within the marketplace itself to try to figure out how to make this be something sustainable. Because once you've introduced uncertainty into the system and you don't have a predictable expectation of what you're going to receive and when you're going to receive it, it makes it incredibly difficult to do future investment. And so today I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers, and I'm appreciative to the sponsor of this session, WSP, for making it possible for us to all be here together in Bellevue so that we can learn from them. So I will begin with a brief introduction, and then each of these gentlemen will proceed to share their expertise and insights with you. So first up, I have Jason Smeek, who is AVP of Global Supply Chain and Logistics and America's Hydrogen Transportation Market Leader. How do you fit that on a business card? With ACOM. Ted Prince, who is CEO of Tri-Cities Intermodal, and Sri Mandawal, Vice President of Operations and Supply Chain with the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. So to begin with, Jason, we will turn the time over to you. And again, thank you all for being here today.
Great. Very happy to be here today. My name is Jason Smeek, and I'd like to thank Penwood for the opportunity to speak with you all today on this panel. I'm with ACOM. It's VP of Global Supply Chain Logistics and Industrial Development, and I also lead a lot of our sustainability efforts for ACOM globally in the freight space. And I'm really passionate about transportation, supply chains, and how to use associated infrastructure to better the world that we live in. I thought I would start with a few slides about ACOM. Just very briefly, we are a professional services company, and we're known globally for our capabilities in design, engineering, and infrastructure consulting for both horizontal, such as ports, railroads, and highways, as well as vertical infrastructure, such as buildings. And we cover transportation where I work, but also energy, environment, buildings, water, infrastructure, and federal business with public and private companies across the globe. We are a company of over 50,000 strong that uses our technical capabilities to deliver a better world. What is our vision? Well, our vision is a world where infrastructure creates opportunity for everyone. And our mission is bringing together the best people, ideas, and technical expertise to partner with clients to turn their ambitions into action. We are an engineering news record, #1 transportation design and facilities firm, environmental, and also #3 in ports and marine infrastructure and the global top 5. As I mentioned previously, we are a global linear and vertical infrastructure firm, and what that means is we play a large role in the goods movement challenges that our clients face across the globe. Our experience encompasses the supply chain and transportation infrastructure that is essential for moving goods efficiently and sustainability around the world. And we support our clients with many different technical services, providing freight transportation planning and engineering for freight rail, for ports and marine facilities, trucking and air freight, as well as enabling the goods flow across different modes of transportation and between those modes from an intermodal perspective. And part of what I enjoy in my role is taking our understanding of how operations and transportation work together and how the infrastructure that supports that interacts with facilities, with city development, and with regional supply chain corridors that are established from that. And really those elements spur then dry port development or railroad industrial spurs, a lot of the projects that we do to connect all of those disparate pieces of the supply chain. We work a lot with port authorities, air cargo, trucking, and railroad operators across the globe to address their issues in intermodal facility development, in logistics and supply chain optimization, in innovative transportation solutions, some of which we'll talk about today, such as innovative solutions like drones, eVTOL for freight movement, automated trucking and automated transit, as well as automated rail cars, alternatively powered cargo handling equipment, such as those powered by battery or by hydrogen, and also digital AI solutions for visibility, for risk sensing, and to improve goods movement speed and efficiency of the network. Last thing I'll mention is that there's a real big focus on sustainability, as we all know, but sustainability has a direct link to resiliency, right? So supply chain resiliency refers to a supply chain's capacity to resist and then recover from disruptions. And what used to be left to chance is now, or a novel practice, is now becoming a requirement, given the structure of the modern supply chain, the infrastructure that's involved, the climate change, and other hazards that we have, as well as global geopolitics. And so having a resilient supply chain gives businesses in the greater region a competitive advantage, and ensuring that there is stability during times of economic volatility and geopolitical uncertainty. We know that sustainability is critical for competitiveness and also for business success. By focusing on creating sustainable infrastructure outcomes, we're able to influence positively supply chain resiliency by also addressing the core issues related to the overall health of the environment, our communities, resources and inputs, as well as economics of our clients' projects. And this also impacts what we call the key enablers of supply chain performance. So we know that when we're building a port or a gateway, a bridge, or transit projects, we're not just building a single link or a single piece of infrastructure, but one that facilitates logistics or mobility, trade or commerce, energy and communications, and also critical lifelines that make our modern world work. So I look forward to speaking with you further about this in our panel today. And for those of you that are interested in learning more, we do have a study called Lost in Transition. It's about the energy transition and also impacts to the future of infrastructure you can access via the internet.
Good year, here we go. Like the Sunday's good, I shoot better. Anyway, my name is Ted Prince. I'm the CEO and I'm the founder of Tri-Cities Intermodal, which is a very specific solution to resiliency, supply chain. And I always love people talking about the supply chain because until you invent the transporter like they have in Star Trek, you're gonna need a glorious asset-based network operating planes, trains, automobiles, trucks to get things done. We're not very resilient here. So let me get started. We are located in the Tri-Cities in Eastern Washington, where the state of Columbia River meets. And we're in an intermodal facility. And we are two things, and this is really important. Can we breathe in? Okay, so first of all, inland ports get thrown around a lot. We are private. Okay, it's been part of that Microsoft hack.
Hey, Ted, if you prefer to go on remote, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's agility in action. Thanks everyone. Good morning. My name is Shri Maniwal and I'm the Vice President of Operations and Supply Chain at Bangalore Port Authority. And in supply chain, these days my life is very mundane and boring. So about the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we are the largest port in Canada. We handled about 160 million tons of goods last year. The trade is going great. This year again, we had some great successes. We are an arm's length federal organization, and that really helps us to serve all Canadians. So there are many provinces who rely on the seaport to move their goods, and that's where we kind of really deliver. Now, given the headwinds, and thanks for all the opening comments on the supply chain challenges and all those things, and you're seeing even in the yesterday's session, trade, tariffs, economic uncertainties, in the COVID pandemic, supply chain disruptions, wildfires, flooding, atmospheric river, and you can go on and on and on. It's a different world in supply chain. While last decade was all about lean supply chain, operating ratios, asset efficiency, utilization, I think the next decade is all going to be about resilience. And when you talk about resilience, you're talking about ability to adapt and recover to the normal state, operating state as quickly as possible. It's not about having additional capacity. It's not about this thing. It's about how we get better, how do we actually be able to predict what's going to happen, how we are preparing, how we are coordinating, how we are collaborating, and how we are responding to that. And with all this, technology comes into play, because that's the big piece. And at the Port Authority, we are really doubling down on port optimization and supply chain resilience as a core strategy. When we're talking about optimization, infrastructure, building infrastructure is difficult, expensive, and it takes time. But how do we get best out of what we have right now? And that's where the key piece is. And how does technology then line up in doing a lot of great things in the supply chain? In today's world, I'm going to go home, drive this afternoon to Vancouver. I already have a notification that I have ordered a couple of parcels on Amazon. It's going to be delivered on my front door when I reach home. Yet, as we recently heard, you don't know where the cargo is. You don't know where the equipment is. You don't know when the ship is going to arrive, or is going to offload, or when it's going to truck out, and when it's going to be delivered. Having a reliable, efficient, and an integrated supply chain is so critical for any nation's economic success. And at the Port Authority, we've taken this challenge, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Like we had the transformer expansion, pipeline expansion that was coming up. For the last 6 years, we've been working on, because this was a big step increase in the number of ships that we were facing in the port. And it also meant that the ships, when they go through the pinch point in our port, it also interrupt the rail transportation. So now we have a conflict between marine and rail kind of thing. And that's where we implemented an active vessel traffic management system, is to increase the coordination and collaboration using technology to really help all the supply chain partners. And the success measure, when the pipeline came up and we saw increased number of traffic, everything was great. Everything worked in cohesion, no problem, no issues. And then today, 1 year later of the program, we are seeing that we have been able, because of this increased technology participation, that we have actually increased the rail bridge capacity by over 10%, because there was so much lack of lost capacity due to inefficiencies. The other piece is all about visibility, predictive analytics, and those are the levers that the Port Authority has. Is that how do we provide an overview of the supply chain so that the supply chain partners can make the right decision? How will we be able to better demand forecasts on what ships are coming? In Vancouver, it's the biggest and largest port, most diversified port, but we also have a lot of challenges around the ships and the impacts on the communities. And with this planning and technology tool, we will be able to kind of really look at that. In a world where AI is moving so significantly fast, where you're talking about a generative AI, and now it's suddenly within 2 years it's gone to agentic AI. The supply chain is so far behind North America, I would say, in terms of using technology to further enhance the reliability and efficiency. So there's huge potential, there's a huge opportunity, a lot of challenges. And as Senator did mention, the question is about how do we get reliable, because the supply chains are long. It's the hinterland to the seaport is almost 1,000, 1,200. We know that most of the products are coming from Trans-Pacific, and it's long. We also know that the global supply chain is so interconnected, because who knew that what happens in Red Sea would impact us, or what happens in Panama Canal with the drought situation. It's going to impact us and the cost of living and the availability of goods. So technology has to be a part of solution, and that's going to be the key driver as we future-proof our supply chain. So really looking forward to the questions and the further more examples. Thanks for the opportunity. Jed, over to you.
Okay, we're gonna do this without a map, but we are located in the Tri-Cities. We are an inland port, which means that we connect to the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. We are private. There is not another private inland port in North America. This is a private sector solution where we partner with the public sector and other private sector providers, specifically the Union Pacific Railroad and the Northwest Seaport Alliance. But as they say on late night TV, wait, there's more. because we are also a node on the Union Pacific's premium transcontinental intermodal network. So if you're shipping 20s and 40s to and from the ports, we can solve. If you're shipping 53-foot equipment to and from Chicago, the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest, we can do that too. There is no other facility like this in North America. In fact, maybe the world. It supports agriculture, but it also supports inland distribution. I've been in this business a long time. I got into this business literally by accident, but I remember what the Inland Empire looked like 40 years ago. And if you look at what's happening in California, if you look what's happening elsewhere, including up north of the border, southeast, northeast, there's no land. The import distribution model under globalization has changed from the Walmart model that said every store within 300 miles of a distribution center to every customer within 50 miles of a fulfillment center, which is the Amazon model, which means you have hundreds and hundreds of distribution points. And the only way you can be a retailer is to defer your inventory decisions until the cargo arrives. North America is screaming for a location that has connectivity, is resilient, is environmentally benign, all of the above. And I believe that that's the Tri-Cities. And I believe the Tri-Cities can be a global distribution hub on the order of Rotterdam, Singapore, Shanghai in 10 years. It has land, it has labor, it has water and electricity. All of which are issues to us here talking. This is unique. This is a great opportunity. We also talk about, we've been watching with amusement discussion about zero emission vehicles and whether there's a magical Class 8 tractor that can handle that. Our point is, if we're coming from Eastern Washington or Idaho or Eastern Oregon, don't worry about zero emission vehicles. Think about what we can do, which is zero vehicles. You put it on a train, you get it out of line, you get it off the highways, you can bypass the pass. This is the new model. Now, talk a little bit, but our addressable market certainly goes into Idaho. We're handling a lot of BSPs and metals. But the issue and the opportunity to export grain in containers is growing. The problem is that grain is grown in the Midwest and on the prairies. There are no containers there. So if you're a farmer and you're competing in a very cutthroat agricultural global market, you can't bring the containers to the grain. We say bring the grain to the containers. We're an inland port, and we can provide an inexhaustible supply of containers and grain to an addressable market that literally extends all the way to the Great Lakes. This region can do this, and we've done it with partners, and Senator Rinke and the Supply Chain Caucus have been early partners and strong advocates of sensible solutions. So I thank Panmar and Bruce and everyone, Tom, for inviting us. This is an exciting time, and we're glad to be part of the discussion.
And thanks, Ted. Thanks, everybody, for the openers. I get the first opportunity to try to bring some hope in the first question here. I know we discussed a lot about the tariffs and the impacts that are going on, not only the economic development, the trade, and really into bringing it into supply chain discussion. So I get the opportunity to question Jason, or at least offer some of these. So Jason, in that aspect, we do have hope. Congress is moving forward with a reauthorization of the federal transportation authorization bill. And we'll hear more about that later today from Elaine Nessel. But Senators Cantwell and Blackburn, who actually have a bipartisan support on this, are supporting robust supply chains. And if you hadn't heard, we want to increase that investment even in the big beautiful bill and some of these other aspects. So Jason, bringing it to your expertise, what would be your advice to bring to your clients in seeking federal infrastructure support for freight corridors? And even we heard about logistic hubs, the discretionary grant programs like RISE, Infra, Mega and Chrissy, and there were some others out there.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator. Yeah, so the current administration has many priorities that are a continuation of previous policy and administration efforts, including the first Trump administration. Some of these are, for example, enhancing transportation safety, including bridges, safety for transportation workers, pedestrians, truck parking, and autonomous vehicles. There's also obviously a focus on efficiency, right? So ensuring that we have accelerated project delivery where possible for transportation projects, and really including reformation of some of the different policies around, for example, NEPA and permitting to ensure that we have streamlining of these projects and we get these pieces of infrastructure into the ground. And that includes the increased use of technology as well. There's also increased opportunities through investment in transportation infrastructure that promotes economic growth, really the focus on doing deals and really getting these projects done, including through expanded capacity and mobility, congestion relief, and private sector investments, which we'll talk a little bit about as well in the PPP front. And then strengthening partnerships with states and other key stakeholders to improve those transportation outcomes, which include prioritizing federal interests, greater efficiencies, research, and ensuring national security and regional resiliency. And I think applicants or our clients should think about how best to tell their story of their project, really to dive deeper and deeper than they have before into the specific real world benefits of the supply chains, our communities, and to our competitiveness as a region and as a nation. And the overall guidance for incorporating sustainable elements is not really a broad brush anymore. It requires communicating benefits very clearly and perhaps with different terms than we had used in the past. So certain elements such as social equity are making way for community outcomes. Key elements around economic growth, competitiveness, national security, and resiliency remain or have actually increased. And listen for these kind of competitive terms when you think about your project in relation to, for example, discretionary grant programs. So critical infrastructure protection, physical security and hardening. We talk about pre-disaster mitigation instead of climate change. Environmental change or extreme weather. Cybersecurity is a very important aspect. So thinking about the fact that we don't have just dumb structures anymore or dumb facilities, they're all connected in a myriad of ways, from the air conditioning systems to, let's say, the traffic control systems in bridges or other types of corridors. All of this is connected and we have a real risk from a cybersecurity perspective. We also talk about disaster risk reduction or hazard mitigation planning, disaster recovery, and of course, sustainability. Projects that improve our trade flows, I think are a great place to look. So when we think about some of those that benefit certain commodities, especially US made or energy like LNG, appear to be very well positioned from a logistics infrastructure improvement perspective. Some of the key lessons learned that I'll share with you today are really takeaways from many grant applications and benefit cost analysis assessments, or start early with your stakeholders, right? So think about your political supporters and really get explicit support for your discretionary grant application for your project. Identify those benefits holistically and communicate them, even if the benefits cost analysis doesn't include them quantitatively. It's important to consider all of these aspects, including resiliency, in your application. Work to set expectations and communicate the cadence with your government counterparts immediately, and communicate those issues that will be caused by delays or inefficiencies in the process. We saw this happen a lot during COVID, after COVID, when we had a lot of, let's say, new grants that were being applied for and then awarded. You know, there's a backlog and it really takes a lot of time and effort to work through those. But there's a big monetary and risk impact or implication to having delays to a project with interest rates and inflation and other things like that occurring, right? We have project costs that then increase, which then increase the overall risk of, let's say, projects not being successful. And then finally, of course, work to advance those grant agreements and be prepared internally as an organization with the cost tracking mechanisms, the management, project management elements of those projects that are necessary for federal grant reporting requirements, something that I found most organizations really aren't well set up for or mature enough to tackle just by themselves.
Thanks, Jason. Got another tip. Make sure if you're wanted to ask another questions that we have some pre-filed. Don't forget to go into the WOVA app. We got it lined up right here. We are technology savvy, at least some of us done this before with some of these. So shout out to the team at Penwar to kind of keep that going and keep the ideas that you guys have. I can see that are turning in the audience. One more for you, Jason. As we discuss some of the federal impacts that are out here, we have a lot of members from both sides of the really the border. So comparing Canadian and trade and transportation policies, which we try to do in the Senate and the Washington state and even along the border states, so Idaho, Montana, and others along with our provincial counterparts. What do you think are some of the best business practices on either side of the border that we should be implemented by the other nation?
Yeah, I'll name two of them. So when looking at Canada, obviously we have the Canadian model for public-private partnerships. I think it's considered one of the world's most successful models of PPPs. I'd love to see America take advantage of really our strong market and the gigantic infrastructure base and the needs that we have for future investment, and combine some of those best practices from Canadian experiences with public-private partnerships with our capital and private equity that's available to spur greater growth, more rapid infrastructure improvements, including within supply chain and logistics and distribution sectors. I think from an American side, we've done really well, I think, with federal discretionary grant programs. You mentioned RAISE, Infra, Mega, CRISI. And I'm actually a part of KGIT, the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, a board member. And we work very diligently to raise the profile of these discretionary grant programs within Congress and advocate for their extension and expansion. It's a great opportunity that we have to apply federal funding to projects that otherwise would be very difficult to address via singular state funding mechanism or via P3s themselves. This is especially true of projects such as those impacting supply chain resiliency, larger kind of multi-region or multi-state corridors, and the benefits and ownership are greater and maybe not indicating one specific owner or specific beneficiary. And so we actually did a study about a year and a half ago with our membership on this topic at KGIT and identified reasons why public funding was sought. Often it was because the project was too large to fund using other sources, was multimodal, so it didn't fit very nicely into a single transportation mode, and the projects were multi-jurisdictional, so that indicates this kind of regional or cross-state, intrastate type involvement needed for project success. Some of the top challenges that we saw were obviously some of the Buy America requirements and addressing kind of the heavy permitting requirements, as well as some agency mismatches that were occurring. Getting through grant agreements and then procurement requirements, and then managing those grants to completion. But there were some other challenges that we also identified around aligning projects with social equity and values and goals, and support from across different federal agencies. So I think the current administration is continuing to work on a lot of these top challenges. That aside, I still believe that we have a leading funding and infrastructure program for fostering transportation through discretionary grant programs.
Thanks so much, Jason. So Ted, kind of following along with that, on the policymaking side of things, with the reauthorization bill up for discussion in committee, what do you see as being a viable path forward, and what recommendations do you have to pursue it in the hopes of coming out with an actual piece of legislation that didn't happen in 24 hours?
So assuming everybody read the legislation. So first of all, as I think about this, as I said, I've been in this business a long time. I remember the first Earth Day. And, wetland become a very important issue. Perhaps one of the most famous wetland creatures is pogo from the Okefenokee Swamp. And Earth Day, 1970, Walter Kelly put out a very famous cartoon with pogo saying, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." And I see that with a lot of policymaking. So first of all, freight is different than passenger, and the legislation includes both, right? Public transit is funded in there. Passenger is different than freight, very significant. And I'm thinking of Claude Rain saying, I'm shocked to hear there's gambling here. Freight moves across corridors. Freight by definition is multi-jurisdictional. So to bemoan multi-jurisdictional issues is kind of saying, well, gee, my business would be really easy if I didn't have any customers. Looking at the reauthorization, what used to be the highway bill, 1991 was really a very important point. It was ICE-T, Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. The E was efficiency, and for the first time, the government looked at a holistic solution. Congressman Norman Mineta was the champion of moving that through. He created an Office of Intermodalism, which, when he was Secretary of Transportation, he disbanded. 7 years later, we had T21, Bud Schuster from Pennsylvania. The E stood for equity. This was kind of like the famous SNL Lieberman Gore skit about lockbox. We're going to have a lockbox on the highway into the highway fund. No one's going to steal any money from us. Whatever's in that fund, we keep for highways. Of course, the fund is bankrupt, and now general revenues are necessary to do this. The life cycle of these events is longer than the legislative time frame that we're working on. The other issue I have is, and I was thinking about it this morning on that very interesting discussion. If we had the bridge where, which was the landmark bill for earmarks, and then we got rid of earmarks, and then when you got rid of earmarks, you got rid of discipline. So if you're going to have bill and bring back earmark, that's one thing, but you need to be honest about it, that if you have earmarks, you might not have the best application. When you think about all this money, and with due respect to all these grants and everything, very little of the money allocated by the federal government is subject to professional expertise. It's all line item, it's all preordained. So the ability for the Department of Transportation, whether it's at the state or federal legislative or executive level or special agency, is minimized. And if you have a situation where people either don't believe in science or don't trust government officials, how are you going to have a situation where our scarce taxpayer money is allocated efficiently? So I don't really think about where the money's going. I think about how the money's going to be distributed, because I think that is a much bigger problem.
So in line with that federal lens perspective, Shri, with Prime Minister Carney coming into office and announcing, at least for now, he has a high level of interest in doing investments in Canada to build up their infrastructure. Do you foresee future investments in transportation similar to the Asia Pacific Gateway and the Border Initiative, or anything else along those lines?
Thanks for the question, and thanks to Jason as well for this recognizing the Canadian model for building infrastructure. So in Canada, we have done something very unique, I would say, through the National Trade Corridors Fund. And this is a kind of a tripartite model where the federal government, the local government, and the industry comes together in a PPP model to deliver the project. And as a port authority, we are the only port authority in Canada that has actually led through 2 rounds of investment now of infrastructure projects. And that has really enhanced, and in the last decade, we have actually grown almost the size of the Port of Montreal by adding another 40 million metric tons of cargo. Having said that, yes, we do also have a lot of challenges in infrastructure delivery. The cost, the benefit, how the cost is going to be allocated and recovered to the industry. So those are some of the challenges that we're working through. I think with the new government in Ottawa, we are really excited about on the progress on the major infrastructure, the importance of supply chain efficiency, and really looking forward to how we can ramp up those investments there and also the plans. So lots of things going on. On the Port Authority front, we are leading a charge on capacity expansion. And when we talk about capacity expansion, one of the major projects that we're launching is Roberts Bank 2 terminal expansion. And again, as we look at, yeah, we had a lot of challenges in the permitting phase for the project, was 10 years in the making. Now we have a federal permit, we have a provincial permit, we're working with some other authorizations that should come next year. And that's going to be opening up 2.4 million container capacity and going to be set for the future generation. This is about reclaiming 320 acres of land and contributing to almost $300 billion of goods movements in Canada. So again, great examples of that. The other piece, as we talk about the supply chain, when you look at the Lower Mainland or the Vancouver Gateway, it's complex. It's really complex because we do have a good strategic importance of location. 3 Class 1 railways, multiple services and industries, with the coordination and our last mile is actually a very long mile. And there are a lot of pinch points in the supply chain that we really want to connect to that, right? So now, as we are talking about, like in the first infrastructure, we did all the work that was within our jurisdiction and under federal lands. The next program that we launched was a little more ambitious, I would say. We really went beyond our jurisdiction to kind of build projects, but then we also ran into a lot of challenges as well. But at this point, as the federal government and all the provinces, and especially British Columbia, are all aligned on the importance of supply chain and getting the infrastructure built quickly and fast. I think that's something that's going to be top of mind and aligned moving in that direction.
Thanks. And as we move in, again, another announcement, we got some, 3 or 4 questions coming into the app, so keep those going. I want to turn it back over to Ted, but for kind of all of 3 of them, as we see AI and the new technology driven that are in there, what are some of the improvements that you see that are impacting? I know we have a big congested area in the Seattle area. How that is working with your company and the things with the private partnerships to move out to the Tri-City area into Walla Walla and inland, but how is that being addressed with AI? And then the second part of that, with the new technologies coming on board, how do you see the impacts of recruiting, inspiring really as a college professor, the workforce of the future? How is that getting play, and what are some of your comments on that as well?
Okay, and I'll give you my cancer cure too, Senator. So first of all, I was at this event earlier this year, 6,000 people in Las Vegas talking about AI. And I thought to myself, wow, they've got registration and they can't even set up a bar and a meal line to get people through in less than 2 hours. Well, I don't need AI for that. I just need to look out. And then someone got up and said, you know, with AI, we can predict where cargo theft is going to happen. And my head just about exploded. I said, well, we've known for 40 years. We can live in Chicago, go home, Bakers, you know. So AI is, it's a technology, but it's not ready for prime time. There are tools that it can use. It's just like blockchain and other things. The problem with our business is that nobody has complete information. So as the joke on the desert island goes, assume the can opener. So even here in the Pacific Northwest, the lines can't talk to the terminals can't talk to the ports can't talk to the railroads, the switching line can't talk to them. I love it when ports talk about their terminals, they're not, they're landlords. So So they're not really interested in operating efficiency once they get the facility built. So that's a challenge. So we're working with the public and private sector to improve things. But one of the problems is that intermodal is a very complicated business with a lot of complicated partners. I've worked with private equity firms. You left out one of Canada's big contributions to the infrastructure business. They turned the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund loose on port infrastructure, marine terminals, and the business has been upside down ever since. Private equity is interested in maximizing profit, not efficiency. So you wonder why gates are only open 40 hours a week or 35. It's because of private equity. So you have a private sector that's for profit, you have a public sector that's looking to benefit, and that's a very challenging situation. When we went in and talked to the Washington Department of Transportation, when we started with this, they laughed when we told them we were building in the Tri-Cities. I said, what's so funny? He said, well, we've been told for 30 years that we need to build a terminal in Eastern Washington. We hired a consultant, and well, of course, the consultant was basically subsidized by someone who gave him the answer before he started. And they said, we're waiting for the private sector. When the private sector comes, we'll work with them. But you have some examples where the public sector gets ahead of them. Anyone heard of Millersburg, Oregon? $35 million, they built an intermodal terminal, 0 loads, shut it down. NISA, Oregon, I'm not picking on Oregon, it's just where the facts are. $25 million, they were 0 terminals, they never even finished it. So just if you build it, they will not come. So we have been very fortunate, with you and your cohorts and the ports near us. We view ourselves as a regional solution, not as a Walla Walla County, not as a Washington, but we say as a solution for the whole region, extending all the way back and helping the farmers. One of the things I've been really impressed with the Tri-Cities, and I know that you contribute your time at Columbia Basin Junior Colleges. I think the junior colleges are really going to be the engine of people that are vocationally astute, that can handle the jobs of the 21st century that we need for transportation. Your colleague on the next county over, Walla Walla County, they have a commercial driver's license program. They have mechanics. This is what we need to see, because those are you're going to attract the people who want to stay there, who want to make a career there, want to have a good job, and this business can do it. Even with the robotics, you're still going to need people in warehouses who have an expertise in electronics and mechanics. They don't necessarily need to be college graduates, but they need to have the hands-on experiences. And I've been very impressed with what Eastern Washington community colleges are doing, because I think that is the model. I'll just say this, I was very disappointed with the ATA president, just very much, there was a lot of politics, and if you're this color, you're wrong, or what have you. I said, the president's wife, Joe Biden, Dr. Joe Biden, she's been teaching in community colleges for 30 years. Now, if you want to go talk to someone who recognizes the value of community colleges, go there, because I think you're going to get a pretty good reception. My wife worked for a community college, raising money. That's the vocational path. And I think all of this fits together between what the public can do, what the private can do, how we work together and realize what is possible, but less is sometimes more. There are 60 less intermodal ramps in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon there were when deregulation started. There's a reason for that. It's because of how railroads think. It's not whether they're right or whether they're wrong, but the tie goes to the railroad. So if you can't work with them, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that a little bit. So, I think there's great opportunities for AI as a tool, but I think there's also the known challenges and risks associated with it. I'm aware of an example, for example, using Teams, where somebody came into Microsoft Teams and joined a call, used and recorded somebody's voice, and then was able to use AI to piece together complete sentences with that person's voice to spam the federal government or other types of transit agencies, et cetera. So like there are real risks that we have to get in front of related to AI. And there's also great promises. I think you made a great point, Ted, about the pace at which we change from a policy perspective in this country. We're all really just focused on this next kind of legislative session or next kind of political change. AI and technology is moving so much faster than that we have a real risk that by the time you address one issue and focus on that as a political or policy decision, you've already been overtaken by another challenge. So we really need to be matching kind of the speed at which the industry and kind of the technology is changing with how we respond from a policy perspective. This is a really important point. There's also connectivity from the sense of risk sensing and using blockchain and other technologies that we can start to dig deeper into data if we have it, right? So I think your point, Ted, about lack of data access or lack of data points really speaks to whether AI can be utilized as an efficient tool or not. And we think about, for example, training AI or machine learning models, right? We often are training it on what we have, right? And it's often potentially not the best model to train it on. So you have bad data or outputs, like, for example, garbage in, garbage out, like we talked about in the past. But there are great opportunities to dig deeper if we have data and are sharing data to sense where risk is, to identify where, for example, there are challenges within supply chains. For example, there's technologies out there where you can go multiple levels within different tiers of suppliers for the manufacturing industry and identify where forced labor conditions might exist in foreign countries, or where you see indicators of human trafficking or things like that. So there are actually ways to do that with AI if you have data. I think the more that we start sharing data and using it for positive purposes, the more AI can realize.
Thanks, Jason. Just to add, I know Ted's experience with the ports, but here in Canada, especially with Vancouver, yes, we are the landlocked port authorities, but I can speak for almost all other port authorities in Canada. We are leading a charge because gone are the days, I would say, where the port authorities would kind of rent it out to a terminal, collect the rent, and look the other way. Because today, where you're talking about supply chain challenges, disruptions, the questions do come to the port authorities. What are you doing about it? And it's also the way our structure is set up because, we support economic security, economic success for the country. And that's the key piece for us is how do we actually get involved with what levers we have within the existing legal framework. So that's very critical for us as we look at. In terms of the technology, I think the challenge with the supply chain, really, and I agree with Ted on that, where no single entity has the entire information. And that becomes a problem of coordination and collaboration. And I gave an example earlier on of vessel traffic management kind of thing, which we implemented in the Port Authority. And that was a key success. Where now, rather than thinking that I'm the only one driving on the border and I'm going to get out in 2 minutes, having that early information is going to be really important to make better decisions. Right? So that's the key. Because the Port Authority cannot make decisions on various commercial supply chain partners, but providing the timely and quality information is going to be really key. So how do we use that aspect is going to be key. Yesterday and today, we talked a lot about climate change, wildfires, impacts, and all those things. And here again, the technology of digital twin comes into play. It's so critical where you actually, rather than relying, experience is important, but rather than saying, okay, we have a breakdown, we have a disruption, and this is how we have always done things, is really using that big data to kind of see and model and simulate and give those 1,000 permutation combinations, because every action that we take has some intended outcomes. But by making an informed choice and using that computer-based simulation is going to be really key in making better decisions. So it really helps with resilience, it helps with adaptability, recoverability, asset utilization, better ways of doing things, testing different models, and that helps with natural disasters as well. And here in the lower mainland, we are working with YVR, we are working with the province to kind of create kind of a digital twin of the region, where the integrated transportation planning can be looked at, and also looking at what else can be done. Right? So those things are all very critical. Teams, AI, all those things are again very important, I would say. Not only in drafting messages and letters and increasing the productivity, it's about demand sensing, it's about risk sensing, what's happening. Since the COVID pandemic, we have what we call a supply chain pressure index issued in New York. But can we look at that part as a resilience index for a region or a port authority, right? Because when you talk about this thing, supply chain is not only about the supply chain partners, there's a lot of external factors influencing, which we are not monitoring or we're not actually tracking. And that's the key, is how the port authorities can take that and build a unified model which supply chain partners can use. And individual players will always have their own business intelligence and making those decisions, but collectively, how's the network performing? How's the corridor performing? Because the success has to be collective. Maybe that's the piece that we really upping on and working to kind of build the momentum, but also use technology to bring more efficiency and reliability.
Really quick. Sure most of us in this room remember where we were on 9/11. And some of us may remember that there was a Blue Ribbon Commission that issued a final report in 2004. I actually read it at 35,000 feet on an airplane. And what struck me was, I said to myself, well, when the supply chain collapses, we've already written the report, because if you go in and just cross out national security, terrorism, and put in supply chain, it foretells. I actually wrote a white paper on this. So then we fast forward to COVID, where it all came back, and we were totally unprepared. And I came up with what I call the 4C excuses, right? COVID, chassis, China, congestion. And that was the perpetual get out of free. But of course we learned, no, because 3 years later, our labor friends in Canada shut down the ports with the railroads, and now we had a 5th C, Canada. So my point is, we know this. You know, the senator, you know, our country, you know, you got the 6 or 7 people, depending on which one you want, but we're not doing anything. We think this technology is going to get us out, when just very simple planning coordination will do this. We don't need a real fan. This is basic business, blocking and tackling. I've run terminals. You could drive, I would come in, I'd drive around, I'd say, that's going to go wrong, that's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong. So I really think it's great that this technology and all these other solutions and all these other organizations want to help, but a doctor, heal yourself. I mean, we have the way and the ability to do this, and we're not doing it. And then when congestion and crisis happens, we all look around and it's ready to go. It's ready to go.
So to Ted's point, the politics are hard to separate from the practical. And as we're sitting here having this conversation, the one thing that comes to mind for me is I view supply chains now as being even more sensitive to the politics. If I look back at the initial reports from earlier this year, it suggested that buyers were building up their supplies because they didn't know what was going to happen as it relates to tariffs. And so they had significantly more coming in the hopes that they could back supply enough that would take the edge off of whatever was coming. As a result, there's been a report of decreases in imports in recent weeks. So as you're looking at your systems, how do you help accommodate the fact that you're going to low lows in terms of the traffic that's flowing through the systems, because everybody's trying to outguess what comes next, but you still have to keep trucks on the road, boats on the water, and trains on the rails.
Back to our friends on Wall Street. When I came up, there used to be a discussion specifically about intermodal terminals. And people would say, oh, we're not going to build the church for Easter Sunday. Well, guess what? If you don't build it for this year's Easter Sunday, you're not going to be able to handle next year's weekday. And that's what's happening. And I would just say, with all due respect, that before the WTO, you had a thing called quota cargo. And it was a real race to get it in because they had quotas on how many widgets from wherever could come in. So people would accelerate and do all of these tricks that they would do so that they could handle it. And the ocean carriers supported this by giving unbelievable amounts of free time. So the boom and bust nature, those are house stakes. It's never gonna, it would be great if everything was completely smooth, and unlike airlines, we can't manage capacity like that. So we have to find a way to do it. But I think the private sector can do it, but you know, the problem is what one private sector solution might be will be viewed as anti-competitive behavior and brought before the government by somebody else. So it's very difficult to find that policy middle of the road. I think you're right about the challenges, but I'm really not sure how the solution goes. And I would say that this problem goes back, you know, a long time. Honest Abe Lincoln, he was a railroad lobbyist. Nobody talks about that. That's where he made his money. So it's a problem, how the public and private sectors work together for the greater good. But the other issue is, from an operations research perspective, you have an objective function. Maximize this, minimize that. Those are the criteria. I pointed out that people don't understand, this was a while ago, how ocean carriers, why do they do such crazy things with pricing? Well, they do it because only one or two ocean carriers are actually in business to maximize profit. Others of them have other reasons, cash flow, mercantilism, national defense, money laundering, pick it what you will. So the problem is you have to accommodate all of these different entities with different functions of which they're trying to do, and that's the case of both the public and private sector.
I'll just add on what Ted mentioned, especially targeting first on the trade. When you look at what happened during the COVID pandemic with all the supply chain disruptions, completely unprepared. Nobody knew how they would handle 100% increase in the volumes of containers. And it's a perfect economic condition where, you know, there's a supply demand imbalance. Look at what happened this year. It's COVID 2.0, where we had a 90-day pause, tariff, front loading, ordering, and increased volumes. But the supply chain was very efficient. They were well prepared, they would handle that, right? So there are a lot of lessons learned that is also implemented on that. Prior to COVID, we have also seen many container lines going out of business, completely bankrupt. And then you've seen in the last few years, the container carriers are making multi-billion-dollar profits, partly due to the increased trade and volumes, but also partly due to the market pricing and the strategy on how they are deploying the vessels, taking capacity elsewhere, maximizing the load on the ship. So those things are again driven by technology. Is how do we actually better use the asset? How do we make them keep the capacity and deliver the services? In terms of the shippers, the challenge for the shippers were in last 6 years, I would say everyone was looking at China plus one policy. Is that, you know, yeah, China, there's a lot of manufacturing, we need to kind of also look at another partner. And then comes this tariff, and then the shippers basically were more penalized because some of the other countries were having a higher tariff than China. But when you're looking at this supply chain, this is where every big box retailer is looking at, is not putting all eggs in one basket kind of thing, right? looking at how different parts can be summarized and bought from different places, many different manufacturing areas, and how they can actually manage the overall impact and resiliency of the supply chain. So that's kind of key critical aspect on the trade piece, the diversification, and increasing the resilience because of that. In terms of the operational piece, as I said, the COVID piece was really bad. Here now in Vancouver, in the first 6 months, we have had another 7% increase in our growth from a record last year. We are blessed as a country. We have a lot of products that the world needs, whether you're talking about energy, whether you're talking about food grain, we're talking about fertilizers, we're talking about critical minerals, and the system is able to handle right now. And we are seeing some best turnaround times on the trucking, we are seeing best turnaround time on the rail services. And we have seen export markets kind of driven to different trade markets. So again, the key piece is meeting the moment and how the supply chain can come together, coordinate, collaborate, and deliver. Because the bottom line is, if you don't move stuff, we can't sell stuff. And how the supply chain is going to be ready for that. So that's going to be the key aspect.
Wanted to add a couple of other thoughts to that briefly. But we also saw a lot of growth in friendshoring and nearshoring over the past decade. You think about the growth in trade with Mexico as an example, and with Canada as great destinations for manufacturing capacity. And frankly, from my perspective, one of the best ways that we can support stronger borders and reduce overall immigration challenges is to build stronger neighbors, right? And so I think that there's a great opportunity to continue the trend with Mexico as an example, as a producer for the Greater North American region or for Canada, in helping to not only have safer sources and nearer sources of supply in our supply chains, but also address a lot of the challenges that we have today. And hopefully that's a message that we all start to see. The other point I wanted to make about resiliency is often it's seeing where opportunities for improvement exist and instituting more of a continuous improvement approach. And there have been, for example, efforts led by Penwar and others to really work across borders to increase that collaboration through tabletop exercises, through collaboration in large urban areas and rural areas between the two, around how to improve resiliency within our supply chains and our transportation networks. One example, I did a project in Tampa, very prone to hurricanes, and they studied supply chain resiliency for critical lifelines of goods that supported the urban area of Hillsborough County. And what we did is we looked at the lifelines of water, of fuel, of building materials, of some of the enablers that support those, like workforce, knowledge institutions, financial flows, and looked at the biggest companies and biggest organizations that supported the movement of goods within the region. And what we found were some pretty interesting things. We found that there were some key, obviously, nodes and some key players that, frankly, we weren't communicating enough with. And through the development of freight advisory committees and also really developing those relationships, they were able to say, okay, well, now I know, the bottling plant manager at Coca-Cola who can, let's say, turn Nestle waters out for us or whatever in the case of an emergency. We always know about, like, for example, setting up listservs for emails, as an example, how hard that is to do, right? And in an emergency, right, when we're experiencing a disruption or hazard, it's even more difficult. So how do we ensure that we're communicating, we're collaborating, we know who to turn to in the case of a hazard or disruption, and really establish those kind of media relationships? And I think that's through collaboration and tabletop exercises.
Resiliency. Resiliency and deregulation are antithetical to each other. Regulation by policy was making sure that there was excess capacity in the system for times of war and national emergency. So when deregulation occurred, all of the excess capacity, which was supported by monopoly licenses where services were constrained to specific carriers, went away. We spent 25 years absorbing that excess capacity, whether it was planes, trains, trucks, or what have you. Resiliency is not cheap. So the question of so many other things here that, and I give the moderators credit for guiding us through here. This is a public-private question as to, it's a great idea, don't tax him, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. Who's going to pay for resiliency? Because it's expensive. And in our business, where we are a network-based, asset-based network operating business, resiliency is expensive. So it's good, but sooner or later, you basically have to have that brick and mortar.
Thank you, and we got about 5 minutes left. I'll try to wrap up 14 questions in one, okay, maybe 3 or 4 questions into one. As you conclude in this and we try to land this plane, a lot of the complex issues that you've already brought up. So name some of the 3 or 4 that you really want to hit on that we've either didn't address during the other questions that are about that, or be kind of drilling down a little bit more. One of the questions or multiple, or just get more detailed of how can ports work with shippers to notify and communicate, you mentioned that better, about notifying about data-driven analysis of what is coming, and then even the preventive maintenance that we see in contingency operations when a hurricane is coming, how do we pre-plan all these different areas that maybe we haven't touched on in the last 30, 45 years. Simple. Yeah, go for it, Ted. You're on a roll with some of your buds.
Thank you, Senator. I think we probably touched on all of them, because they all, it's a Gordian knot of policy and profitability. So I think it's all Churchill's question. I'm on one hand an economist. He has 10 economists, you get 11 opinions. I think the panels identified it, and we looked to our public leaders and our private leaders to bring this together, because I think the answer varies on location, culture, adjacency of other political entities, but it is a real challenge. So I think we've touched, I think the shopping list is complete. I'm not sure we have the menu yet.
My perspective, I think the key point is that we are only strong as the weakest link. And because there are so many supply chain partners and it's so complex and diverse and globally connected, that's the key piece, is that how do we come along together, right? So within the region, within the country, so that's going to be the key. Then you go beyond the shareholder value and look at what the network value and the benefit to the country is as part of the supply chain. That's going to be the key aspect.
I think there's a couple of key elements for greater resiliency in supply chain. So we talk about robust governance and management, right? So understanding that supply chains are a system of systems, and understanding how operations actually work and incorporating that into decision making, including kind of creating a trained mechanism in your organization about how to handle resiliency, identify risk, understand the impacts within your supply chain is a very important aspect. Often that means incorporating supply chain mapping and thinking about how to work with your trading partners to share information and be more transparent. There's adaptability and flexibility, so the ability to quickly adjust your strategies, your processes, and your resources in response to disruptions. And having diversity within sourcing or within transportation modes is an example. In fact, some of the logistics and distribution clients that I'm working with that are large multinationals are also looking at secondary modes or other additional modes that they haven't considered in a long time. For example, incorporating rail again into their supply chains, traveling on truck as an example, be reconnecting to the network. And I think these are really important points about not just saying you're resilient, but actually putting it into the brick and mortar, like being sure that you have actual connectivity. Strong and collaborative relationships, we talked about at length today, and how important that is, not only in being able to identify collective solutions, but also from a policy perspective and a governance perspective, and working cross border between states as well as within countries. And then finally, two other things, thinking about simulation and scenario planning. If you have the data, there are a lot of tools that you can use today to model, for example, using digital twins or other technologies, what might happen in the event of certain types of scenarios. Again, I think this helps train that muscle memory around resiliency. And then finally, communication transparency. So looking at how to share some indicators within the industry about where disruption might be occurring. For example, the flow platform that DOT had worked on previously and continues to advance around how you collect and share anonymized supply chain data to identify, for example, where potential bottlenecks might be. I think having more transparent data sharing might give us a leg up on where some of these resiliency challenges and investments are.
So I want to thank our panelists for their very thoughtful engagement on what are not easy questions. And just to kind of close things out for this morning, I wanted to focus on the second half of the title of this breakout session, which was collaboration. You heard each of them make references to the human aspect of it, but I really want to drive home the fact that computers don't collaborate, people do. You know, we can set up all the technology we want, but if we haven't figured out the human component, all of this falls apart. And so when I look at an organization like Penwar and what we're capable of doing through Penwar, whether it's across states or the region in its entirety with provinces in Canada, the reality remains is that our effectiveness is going to come down to our ability to work together. I didn't hear a single answer today that came down to I and I alone have the solution to the problem, I can fix it by myself. Instead, what they heard extensively and repeatedly was that it requires working across multiple systems, across multiple individuals, multiple teams, and that's going to essentially be the secret sauce that potentially finds a resolution going forward. There is no single source, single individual capable of resolving these issues. And so I hope your takeaway today is the come to a close, is that you can look at this and you can identify your role in this process, whether it's advocating to your federal officials when it comes to reauthorization, to ensure that we have the funds that are necessary for us to do this thing that we're doing. Or if you're someone who's in a position as it relates to the supply chain, you have the ability to do the outreach, to form those kinds of partnerships that are going to be necessary going forward. We don't exist in a bubble, and if nothing else, COVID revealed just how heavily dependent we are on a bunch of things that we don't even see. It's essentially the equivalent of we expect water to come out of the faucet when we turn it on until it doesn't, and then we get really interested in how water ends up in our house. By that point, it's a little late. And so we need to care about these things that are happening and just seem to be working, because if we care after the fact, then we may be at a point where our options become much more limited. And as we've heard in the discussion today, there are plenty of options in front of us to help find resolution to the issues that I think some of us are dealing with, whether it's on a personal or professional basis. The question is whether or not we're prepared to act on it. I think we are. I think there are individuals who are game and who are willing to get into it to do the work that needs to be done. But it is going to be work. And I think at the end of it, when it's all said and done, I feel a little bit better about things after listening to what's going on. And at the same time, recognize that there are still challenges that we need to find solutions for, and organizations like Penwar provide that platform for us to have those conversations and to pursue those opportunities in a way that increases the likelihood that we will be successful. So I want to say thank you to all of you who have attended. Thank you again to our panelists. I appreciate the discussion that we had here today. Thank you to my co-moderator, Senator Benke. It has been a delight. And I would encourage you all to go enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, as I mentioned earlier, this is a first session in a track. So the session later this morning will focus on congressional funding and continue the discussion about supply chains with our Canadian partners. We have a Canadian clean energy company to talk about the integration of energy and transportation. Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have a feature, our signature session is the lunch with the World Shipping Council CEO who went to Bellevue High School, which is kind of cool. He's based in Washington, D.C. Joined by John Wolf and Sri. John Wolf is the Northwest Seaport Association president, and your colleagues, Representative Jake Fye, the chair of the House Transportation Committee, is going to moderate with Lori Otto from Washington Council for International Trade. So it should be a great session. In the afternoon, we're going to talk trucking. We're going to talk about the I-5 Cascadia corridor with BC Washington Trucking Association. We're going to look at a really interesting clean energy hub in Portland involving Amazon Distribution Center, a truck stop, and a local community next to the Portland Airport in Seaport at the junction of I-5 and I-84. Should be an interesting session. Later in the afternoon, we are going to get an update about the Amtrak Cascade service and also a look at Burlington Northern Santa Fe and what they are doing for AI to maximize their operation and increase their safety. Then we're going to look at the future. We're going to be talking about high-speed rail in the Cascadia Corridor, the topic of our colleagues at the Cascadia Innovation Corridor and Microsoft and other hosts and their major projects. Actually, yesterday we met with the U.S. Ambassador to Canada. In the afternoon, we discussed FIFA and World Cup and getting ready for FIFA and making sure that we have enough Amtrak cascades and transit and intercity coaches to get people back and forth across the border for this incredible event coming in the year. And then tomorrow we have two very interesting sessions. We're going to be focusing on maritime supply chains. Basically, we talked about emergencies, and one of the things that we did at Pembroke recently in Bellingham was to review what happened when the Nooksack River flooded in 2021. Some of you may have been involved in that. Shut down all the supply chains across Canada into lower mainland, Trans-Canada, the railroads. So we had to special dispensation. We had to run trucks on I-90 and Highway 2 to feed our partners in Vancouver, kind of reverse of what happened in 9/11 when we took our airplanes. And so because of that, the possibility of flooding and earthquakes dominates our supply chain discussion. So we're going to talk about Alaska and shipping, kind of the old North to Alaska, going back to the Klondike days. But the Alaska port situation is very precarious. Alaska is the most prone part of Penwar for earthquakes, and if we lose a major port like Anchorage, we have deep trouble getting folks fed in Alaska and energy there. So that's going to be a very interesting session in the morning. And then later in the morning, we have an exciting opportunity to look at advanced aviation at Penwar and Field Northwest Council. We talk a lot about all modes, transit, highway, rail, maritime, and aviation. And so we're going to talk about electric vertical takeoff and landing, both in terms of moving people and goods by electric or hydrogen-powered drones without pilots, and what kind of impact that's going to have on the supply chain and moving folks. And actually, Jason, if you're still around, I know you do EVTOL, as they call it, for AECOM, so you can join our panel. That would be great. And so that's our session. And again, we're going to reconvene on these topics in Portland. Tom Lang in the back, if you have questions about our deputy director about Portland, we'd love to have you come down and join us. We're going to continue the conversation. So thank you very much, panel. Appreciate it.